Good evening. Welcome to what edition are we on now? I think we're on episode 7. That's all right. Episode 7 of All Things Alberta. I'm your host, CC Michael. Once again, we are dealing with all things Alberta, as the title says. Welcome to the show. I want to let you know that today's show is I had a special guest lined up, but he's a young man with a young family, and he has fatherly duties. His young guy is not going to bed on time, so the topic I was going to have him deal with, he's vastly more qualified to talk about this than I am, but I'm going to give it a go anyway. So we're going to talk about just 3 things today. We had an inspired topic. I always love people inspire me to talk about certain things, and one of the comments this week that I got from the last show was something about keep religion out of politics, which I thanked the young lady. I'll call her young lady. I don't know if she was young or not, but I want to thank the young lady for bringing it up, because it's a great topic. I'm not sure what it had to do with the last video. The last video, if you remember, was I had Pastor Jeff Jones on, where we talked about is Alberta truly the Bible Belt of Canada? And it was funny because after going back and watching the show, I'm not sure we actually answered the question. So I'm going to answer it for everyone right now. I think you got the gist of what he was talking about. I set up all the links to his research, the 5-part blog that he did on it, and all the outstanding work that he did. In the end, Alberta is not. I can't remember exactly which area, numbers wise, or what he figured out was sort of, if you want to call, there is no such thing as a Bible Belt in Canada. I think the closest you're going to get is interior BC. Is it interior BC or Abbotsford area BC? I want to say Abbotsford area BC is likely the best place to call the Bible Belt of Canada, but Alberta is not it. Not even close. We are highly secular out here. We are very pragmatic people. As was covered by Pastor Jeff, was that we are heavily influenced by a great many things, but one of them is the United States. We are far closer to our American friends, we'll call them that. We're far closer culturally to our American friends than we are to Eastern Canada, even Central Canada. The one year I worked out in Ontario for a summer was... It became very evident to me during that 4 months I was out there that Western Canada is a very different place. Felt like a fish out of water out there, and it was obvious that we were coming at things from a very different viewpoint. Whereas, to be honest, I feel the same way when I'm in the U.S. You go across the border and into Montana or Idaho, and man, you're just across the border, and people... you're no longer in, how's that go? I'm no longer in Kansas. So that's one of the topics I'm going to tackle today. I was really hoping to have my friend and scholar Kevin Grebe on to answer that. He's a philosophical, smart guy. Like I've said before, more often than not, I want to have smarter people on this show than I am. That's not hard. Kevin was going to do that for us today, but unfortunately, fatherly duties got in the way, so he couldn't make it. But I'm going to make a stab at answering that question. What else are we looking at? Oh, yes. This week, because we don't have enough to worry about with the coronavirus, the Alberta Health Minister, Tyler Shandro, ended up in some hot water. And of course, that led to an overreaction by the left, some mainstream media types. And so I want to address that story. And finally, like I was saying, I want to deal with Alberta separation issues and tonight I want to deal with the one of currency. And it was interesting because I found some stuff out when I did a little bit of research into the currency. There's kind of three options that I see for our currency issues, conundrums, whatever you want to call it, our currency problem. And so I'm going to share that with you. So without further ado, let's dive into it, shall we? The exact quote from the young lady, I'll just continue calling her the young lady because it was on Facebook, I remember that, where underneath the last post, she had essentially one line, and the one line was, and I hope I've remembered it correctly, but it was, keep religion out of politics. This is not a new idea. I had a very brief conversation with her in which I informed her that this was not possible, and because it's not possible, why even try? Okay, so what I want to do is briefly kind of pick apart or try to guess what exactly she means. I don't want to misrepresent her. I don't want to put words in her mouth that she doesn't mean, but generally speaking, when people say something like keep religion out of politics, what they mean is a separation of church and state. Unfortunately, with regards to what that means, separation of church and state, it has been co-opted. Is that the word? Co-opted? It has been taken over by the secularists to mean something that it didn't mean in its original context. And I'll talk about what they think it means now, but I want to briefly look at what it means when we're talking about the separation of church and state. This first came from the pen of Thomas Jefferson back in 1802. He wrote, it was a response letter to the Danbury Baptist Association of Connecticut, when the Danbury Baptist Association of Connecticut wrote to Thomas Jefferson regarding what they were worried about was that they weren't allowed to be Baptists, that the government would introduce a state church like the Church of England or the Church of Scotland and so forth and so on, Church of Sweden. All of these European nations had a state church. And often what happened with regards to the state churches was the state churches persecuted those. First of all, they were supported by the government. So a certain amount of your taxes, when you were taxed by the government, a certain percentage of that tax went directly to the church to support the state church. This is one of the reasons why many of the pilgrims came to America in the first place, is to flee persecution by the state church, especially when one monarch would be a Catholic and the next monarch would be a Protestant. And then as the Protestants started splitting, then you've got Protestant versus Protestant. You've got Lutherans and Anglicans drowning Anabaptists, and on it goes. It's a bit of a mess. And so lots of people fled the European continent and UK. It wasn't called UK at the time, but you know what I'm getting at. And they came to America fleeing. They wanted religious freedom, okay? And so the Baptists of Connecticut, Danbury Baptist Association of Connecticut, 1802, wrote a letter to Thomas Jefferson asking whether or not, essentially, is there going to be a state church? And Thomas Jefferson wrote back helping them understand that the U.S. Constitution under the First Amendment basically guarantees freedom of religion. And that in his mind, the quote is, it built a wall of separation of church and state. So no government would tell you as a free person what to believe in religiously. This was entirely up to you. We'll call it religious toleration, but the United States was kind of the first one that took it to the extreme. You can believe whatever you want, right? And you can freely congregate and believe that which is between you and your God, right? And so, as I stated earlier, this line's been hijacked by the seculars to mean, and it's a broad brush, right? This has come to mean that religious morality has no place in the law of the land, right? It means basically keep your religion out of the law books of a country, a province, a state, whatever. My argument is that this is not possible. What I wanted to look at is, just so you know, I'm not switching definitions. I'm not doing a straw man fallacy. I'm not doing any of that. What I want to do is I want to show you, if I click that one and then click here and then click here, religion definition. There we go. Can you see it? Yes, you can. Good. Here's the definition of religion. So when we look at the definition of religion, most people, I would argue, look at the first number one definition there. It says the belief in and worship of a superhuman controlling power, especially a personal god or gods. And I'm sure this is what this young lady means, is keep your God out of the law books. Probably the bedroom. That's the more popular thing to say. Keep your God out of my bedroom. Or the state has no business in the bedroom. Blah blah blah. Regardless, the problem with that definition is that religion encompasses far more than a belief in God or gods. You can have religious systems that don't believe in a god at all, but we would all call them religious. Buddhism doesn't have a god, but we would all say it's a religious system, right? And so I think a far better term is the second one definition. This is the biblical way of understanding religion, I believe, and that is a particular system of faith and worship. So when you look at that definition and we boil it down to its basic understanding, all people are religious. All people are religious. So I would argue in North America the I don't know if it's the dominant religion. I would argue that for all practical purposes it's the dominant religion, and that would be secular humanism. Secular humanism is the dominant religion in North America. I would say the Western world today, including Western Europe and whatnot. The issue is that all worldviews are religious by nature, all of them, including atheism, secular humanism. All of them are religious by nature. And what I mean by that is that all worldviews start with presuppositions. Now, what I don't want to be accused of here is switching religion with worldview. But a worldview is a particular system of faith and worship. They all have the term I want to use is axiom, but most people aren't familiar with that term, so I don't want to use it. Presuppositions, I'll use that one. All systems have presuppositions, pre-beliefs that aren't provable. They are inherent in the system. They are assumed. They are assumed truths that can't be proved, but they are simply accepted. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense to you. All of them do. And I would argue that is the essence of religion, is that you've got presuppositions which are assumed to be true but cannot be proven, and all of them have it. I want to show, yeah, it's a good time for that. I want to show something John Adams had said, and this is going to seem familiar to you, I'm sure. Because if we're looking at an independent Alberta, and this is for those separatists especially out there, I believe it's a matter of when, not if, we are going to have a separate nation, that we are going to have to come up with a set of rules, a set of values, a set of morals, a set of laws that are based around something. And I know that there are many that want to be a republic, and good on you. I've no problem with a republic. The U.S. is a republic, and it's based around a constitution. But it's interesting that people kind of forget how well thought out that constitution was, and that you have someone like John Adams who comes along, and he says the following: "Our constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." It was interesting when I was looking at some of the understandings of what John Adams meant here, and it was shocking to see the number of people that tripped all over themselves to actually equate it to Donald Trump, and not in a good way. Donald Trump was the example that they used to go, well, you know what this means is that it has to go beyond the letter of the law. These are from university professors, like I said, that in my mind are tripping all over themselves to to avoid what is blatantly obvious by what John Adams meant. I believe what John Adams meant was that without a moral, objective, I want to make that word very big, objective. Without an objective standard, a constitution's not going to do anything. It's not going to mean anything, not for long. And we're already seeing that. We're seeing many in the U.S. attack their own constitution and change meanings of the words in the Constitution, because they know attacking the Constitution. There are some that would outright want to change the Constitution. Don't get me wrong. They are there. But they know it's not a popular stance. So what they do is they start to change definitions. They try to capture the essence of what the founding fathers meant. And we can't know for certain what they meant in their day, because that was 250 years ago. But now we're just going to adopt whatever is I want to use the term zeitgeist, but I'm going to use that later. The spirit of the day, in order to interpret the Constitution in whatever way our society wants to look at it. And when that happens, you end up in Plato's world, where he specifically talked about the fact that democracies always devolve into a tyranny. Always. Thomas Paine, this is on here as well if you're looking at the screen. Thomas Paine said, "Government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil. In its worst state, an intolerable one." The reason why you want a constitution, or the only way a constitution is going to stand upright for a moral and religious people only, is because of the anthropology of people. I think that's a tautology. I think I did that again. People have an understanding of the nature of man. A biblical understanding of the nature of man is that we are all evil. We are all born evil. We're all born children of Satan. We're not children of God. We're children of Satan. Man is fallen, and there's something called depravity, and we are all depraved. We are all morally depraved. And government in this fallen world is necessary. But it's evil. Why? Because people are evil. Governments are made up of people. And so therefore, governments are evil. And you can have governments that have checks and balances like the United States. I think that's the best example of one that's supposed to have the proper checks and balances. But then you have others that don't, and they always devolve into a tyranny. I would even argue that the United States in the last, I don't know, arbitrary number in the last 30 years, maybe especially in the last 20, with the rapid onset of postmodern thought has come home to roost, and suddenly the U.S. is quickly falling into a tyranny. And I'm not talking Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not your problem. James Madison here also said, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. This all comes back to anthropology and the understanding that people are evil and they will abuse their power. And if the checks and balances don't last, if they are not, if there is no objective standard by which even governments are held accountable to, then democracies always fall into tyranny. More often than not, the tyranny of the majority or by the majority. We can get into that later. So how does this affect Alberta? Why am I talking about it when I'm talking about all things Alberta? Because, like I said earlier, I believe Alberta will one day form its own government, and we need to think through some of these issues. The question I have is, what prevents Alberta from quickly devolving into a tyranny? There are some right now that believe Jason Kenney is a dictator. There are others that believe that Donald Trump is a dictator. It is amazing how absolutely historically illiterate people are if they are equating Kenney and Trump in with dictators of the recent historical past. It's mind-blowing. Pardon me. So, if we adopt, see, the Constitution of the U.S. was largely adopted on a Judeo-Christian basis. The foundation is Judeo-Christian, meaning that there are inalienable rights belonging to mankind. Includes women, for those of you sensitive lefties out there. That no one can take away. But where does that come from? It doesn't come from man. It doesn't come from some arbitrary man-made law. It comes because of God's law. God's law doesn't change whether you like it or not. And all people are subject to God's law, whether you like it or not. Man's law, the morality of man's law changes like the tide, changes like the wind. What is legal and righteous today will be illegal and immoral tomorrow. I've warned my children about getting on social media too young, or even when they do get on social media, watch what you say, because 20 years from now, who knows what is going to be considered good and what's going to be considered immoral, and a joke that you say today can slap you in the face 20 years from now, especially if you're in the public life. It's just not, in my mind, it's not worth it. So the argument goes that the basis of all laws are religious in nature. It doesn't matter what the law is. All laws deal with morality. And how you understand morality has everything to do with how you understand the grander questions, the philosophical questions, the religious questions in life. And so the idea that somehow you can separate yourself from your religion is impossible. It can't, because all people are religious. Everybody is, regardless of whether or not you call God God or not. Everyone has answers to the big allegedly unsolvable questions, and how you answer those questions also depends upon what laws you make. and all laws are moral in nature. That's the point. I know my friend Kevin would have done a much better job on that, so I apologize. If you guys want to roast me for, roast me if you have to. Doing my best. Like I said, I'm trying to find smarter people than me. Our next topic today is the mess. The mess that our health minister Tyler Shandro ended up in this week. I think I'll start off by just saying that please understand, by no means am I saying what he did was right. To be honest, I don't know what the right answer is. I kind of feel like I'd have done far worse. I'll put it that way. He did well in my eyes. He did well, all things considered. But then again, I'm not a minister. I don't represent the government. Do we have to hold these people to a higher standard? Yes. However, people are human. People are human. He's human. Just in case you haven't heard what the story is, I was on Twitter when I saw this story. I just happened to, I don't know who retweeted it, because I definitely wasn't following this person. Minister Shandro and his wife were attacked by a PhD activist. Now, you'd only know that, like, she had a doctor in her name, and her tweet had to do with essentially some mistruths. I'll put it that way. She did some research, and it was like an eight tweet long look what I found out sort of gotcha moment, in which she tweeted out a bunch of false information, wildly false information, and, well, maybe not wildly false. It was false information which was wildly misleading. So I'll go with that. Wildly misleading. And it took off on social media, especially amongst medical doctors. I originally thought she was a medical doctor, and I read through her tweet. I could see some issues in it. She's guilty of libel. It was inappropriate, especially attacking Minister Shandro's wife as well. She was playing the part of a journalist who was investigative journalist, who dug up some information and then made a bunch of inferences that weren't true. And unfortunately, because it had to do with the ongoing dispute between Alberta doctors and the government, some Alberta doctors jumped on it and retweeted it. And what it led to were threats and forms of brutal online bullying that eventually led to the, I don't know what they're called. I'm calling them the Medical Doctors Association of Alberta. I'd have to look it up. I'd have to find the original tweet, which I don't want to do. But it led to the group that represents the Medical Doctors of Alberta, that the head, issue a statement on social media. And on that, it was basically a call for medical doctors to be better. She recognized that medical doctors were forwarding and retweeting false information that was damaging and was not helpful, and that there were threats and bullying going on to Shandro and Shandro's wife in particular. And they kindly asked the doctors to stop. They apologized on behalf of the doctors and also asked the doctors to stop. This is where it gets dicey. as I'm a big fan of online memes, I think most of them are well done. There are some brilliant people out there that come up with some pretty witty stuff on memes. And although I didn't see this meme, the story goes that a medical doctor, shared online a meme that was made specifically regarding this untrue situation or misinformation that was exacerbating the problem. And Minister Shandro, Minister Shandro was neighbors with this doctor, knows the doctor, and confronted the doctor. What I want to do here is maybe I'll just bring up the statement. If I go this one, what does that get us? Here we go. This is a picture of the statement that this came from Brett Wilson's tweet, but it came from Tyler Shandro. It says, "Yes, I am a minister of the government of Alberta, but I am first and foremost a father and husband." That's really important, by the way, for those out there that are screaming activists that don't have children, will never have children, don't have a husband, blah blah blah. You might not understand the point being made here, but this is a very important opening salvo. Last week, my wife was subjected to an online campaign of defamation, which led to her facing harassment and threats at her place of work. At one point last Friday, my wife was even concerned that someone would show up to her office, jeopardizing her personal safety and that of her staff. Of course, the attacks on someone I love and the mother of my children upset me deeply. As any husband would do, I responded passionately to defend my wife. Minister Shandro, good on you. I have known Dr. Mukharam Zadi, hopefully I said that right, for many years, and have known him as a decent, honorable man. On Saturday, when I saw that a longtime political acquaintance and neighbor had posted something, so that's regarding Dr. Zadi. When I saw that a longtime political acquaintance and neighbor had posted something to social media that was contributing to the attacks against my wife, I went to speak to him and implore him to cease propagating this false information. I also responded personally to a few Albertans' emails directly stating that harassing my wife because they disagree with me as a minister was not acceptable. I fully expect to face attacks when I signed up to run for office, but my wife did not. That is true of any elected official's family. I fully recognize the enormity of what our province and country is going through right now and regret that this episode has become a distraction. For that, I am sincerely sorry. I am determined to continue tirelessly performing my role during this pandemic and pledge to not get distracted by social media attacks during this extremely serious time. Context. If you were to listen to the mainstream media, Ryan Jesperson of 630 Chet, I'm looking at you, Rachel Notley of the NDP and all of her minions, you would assume that the minister just randomly showed up at some doctor's house that he didn't know and then started berating them in front of everybody, causing a big scene, and that there was no previous relationship here and that this behavior is unacceptable, blah, 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 please step down. To say I'm disgusted with how this story has been framed, presented, ending with the calling of the resignation of our health minister during this time, is nothing short of disgusting. Rachel Notley and the NDP, I didn't have a whole lot of good to say about you to start with. But you've shown your true colors over the last few months. You are the epitome of not letting a crisis. How's that expression go? Never letting a crisis go without. Dang it! I'm messing it up. You're despicable people, is what I'm trying to say. Anyone who uses this crisis that we're going through right now to score political points is disgusting. The fact that one of the reasons why I like doing this show after the fact is that everything gets to calm down. Everything gets to play out. You get to see both sides of the story before you make a decision. And you're not jumping in looking like idiots with regards to having only half the facts. And once again, it's unfortunate because 630 Ched and Ryan Jesperson, half the time I don't mind him. But when I saw his tweeting jumping all over the this situation, demanding the removal of the minister, is head-shakingly bad. This minister is under a ton of pressure right now, and then to have my question to people is, what is he supposed to do? What was the correct course of action here? Biblically, he did the right thing. He confronted the person, went right to them. It was his neighbor. It was somebody who knew. It wasn't a stranger. He went right to the source and asked them to stop. And this is what is getting him in hot water. His wife has been threatened, and he's defending his wife. All over lies. I made the point on social media to some people that are jumping all over Minister Shandro, and continuing, by the way, to spread lies. I asked them, would the proper thing for him to do is to charge them with libel? Take them to court? Is that the right thing to do? How well would that look? A government minister taking a bunch of people to court over libel. Wouldn't look good. Can't do that. Although legally that's his right to do it. What else could he do? Take it? There are some people that even Minister Shandro here acknowledges the fact that he expects attacks as a minister of the government. He expects attacks. But what most people don't seem to understand is that just because somebody is in government doesn't mean you get to lie about them. Rachel Notley, I'm talking to you. You don't get to lie. You don't get to make up stuff and then spread it all over the internet or elsewhere, and then stand behind the defense that, well, he's a government official. He signed up for this. No. What he signed up for was to be scrutinized with regards to the decisions that he's made. What people don't get to do is make up lies and say that he's guilty of breaking the law, which he's not, and basically defame his character and that of his wife. You don't get to do that. That's beyond the pale. Over the line sort of thing. You don't get to do that. So shame on you, all of you that jumped all over this story and piled on to what was already a gross situation. Shame on you. People wonder, I saw it, speaking of memes, I saw a great meme about Justin Trudeau's people that are directly involved with the crisis that we have here, and the ministers involved, and showed their resume, so to speak. We have some seriously unqualified people running our government, making policies. Uh, Unbelievable. People wonder why we can't get good qualified people to run for government. It's this sort of crap. That's why. No one signs up for that, especially when most qualified people are already very successful at what they're doing. Um, Most of them probably make more than what they would make as ministers with a lot less headaches. Uh, Being part of the government is what I call a calling. Somebody who really wants to make a difference. I'm not sure that most politicians fit that anymore. I think most politicians are happy to sit back and collect their paycheck, gravy train. I know this is a broad brush, but it's frustrating to see, especially when you cannot get good people to run for important positions that they would be qualified for. And it's because of the media. If you're on the wrong side of the fence, man, oh man, it's basically a jungle out there. It seems to me like anything goes. And so why would anyone subject their families to that kind of mob mentality that oftentimes is exacerbated by mainstream media piling on? Mainstream media types, you want to know why no one trusts you? It's because of crap like this. Lastly, I want to deal with Alberta's. So often the question comes up with, what are we going to do that if Alberta was to separate, what would we do with regards to our currency? And then what's funny is that there seems to me anyway that there's a bunch of flippant answers out there. And so there's three options that I see that are doable, possible, and won't take long to run through. Is actually quite enlightening. Number one thing we in Alberta could do is start our own currency. We could do that. I would if we were to go that route, I would avoid a straight paper currency. I would tie our currency directly to the gold standard, something that should be done. The problem is how is any paper dollar valued? Today it could be at a certain standard, and tomorrow it could be worthless. Whereas gold, if it's tied to the gold standard, then it's tied to the price of gold, which is much, much, much more stable. So if we in Alberta were to start our own currency, I would hope that we'd be smart enough to tie it to the gold standard. The second one is we could continue using the Canadian dollar. Now, some people balk at that, especially those outside of the province, thinking that, you know what, if Alberta leaves, basically the idea is screw them. They can set up their own. We're not letting them use our Canadian dollar. This is spoken by people that don't have a clue how currency works. Even worse than me, I'm not a rocket scientist in how currency works, but I do know that the more people that use a currency, the more it's generally valued and the more stable it is. So 4.5 million people not using your currency does not increase the value of your currency. There's less people using your currency. So how does that help Canada? So yes, we could continue using the Canadian dollar. The Canadian government would even, in my mind, the Canadian government, outside of being petty, which is entirely possible, this is Trudeau after all, would actually want Alberta to continue using the Canadian dollar, just to keep helping prop it up as being a worthwhile currency. If you talk 71 cents per US dollar, worthwhile. The last, of course, is the US dollar. Now, one of the things that I thought when I've heard people say, you know what, we could just use the US dollar, I thought, is it just that easy? We'll just use The US dollar. Why not? Doesn't the US have any say in this? Well, here's what I found out. I'm going to switch over to the screen here for a sec. Go to this one. Here's a list of countries. I mean, they're not major countries, I get that, but here's a list of countries that use the US dollar as its official, that's the important term there, as its official currency. Puerto Rico, Ecuador, El Salvador, Zimbabwe, Guam, US and British Virgin Islands, Timor-Leste, and American Samoa, and there are more. All of these countries use the US dollar as its official currency. Well, how did they do that? Well, I did a little research here. I found this blog, and it looks like the author did a great job in actually researching. It's not some dude on a microphone like I am. It looks like he actually did some research, including a New Republic story about the use of the US dollar in Zimbabwe. And so in here, I found out that the US government does not stand in the way of countries adopting the US dollar as their currency. Now, as he makes clear here, the US government does not, it doesn't help a country adopt their dollar, but it doesn't do anything to dissuade them from using the dollar as their official currency. They don't have to ask. A country like Zimbabwe does not have to ask the US government, can we please use your US dollar? They don't have to. They just adopted it. And it is now, in Zimbabwe, it's now the official currency of that country. And there are all kinds of countries that have done the same thing. In fact, as it makes it clear here that the United States actually makes a profit, a $20 billion per year profit off of foreign countries using their dollar. Now, 20 billion sounds like a lot. It is a lot, but not compared to the U.S. The U.S. economy. That's a drop in the bucket. Not a big deal. But it's still, as the author said here, it's still free money, right? Like $20 billion a year. Other upsides are obvious. Every time another country uses our American currency, it reinforces the US dollar as the world's preferred international currency. And so it sounds like it is just that easy. So of the three, which one would I want? If I could be guaranteed that the US, if I could be guaranteed that the new Alberta, Buffalo, whatever we're going to call ourselves, country, if our currency was tied to the gold standard, that would be the most preferable. I don't know if the chances of that are very high, but that would be most preferred. The obvious easy one would be to just adopt the US dollar. It is the most stable, I believe, the most stable currency in the world, will be for the next, I don't know how many years. Some people, I read earlier when I was looking up my research, it looked like some people are holding up the Chinese yen. I want to say it's yen. The Chinese yen as the currency of the future, but I don't know. Sorry. I'm not as keen on anything China, especially lately. There are issues in a dictatorship in China. I don't think it's as stable as what they say it is, and I don't think China's taking over the world as much as they may want to. Anyhow, that about wraps up the show today. I want to encourage everyone out there to stay safe, be diligent, continue to take care of one another. I do know that this week I was reading somewhere that the number of people that domestic issues, police are being called to domestic issues. Why? Well, because the kids are home and everyone's working from home and everyone's home. And for the most part, this is just me throwing this out there. I think the problem's obvious. You've got families home and spending a ton of time together, and they're not used to it. They are learning about one another. Kids are learning about their parents. Parents are learning about their kids. Maybe couples are learning about one another again and realizing, wow, this, you know, it might be weird to say, but there are some parents out there that don't like their kids. There's some kids out there that don't like their parents. And now they're all stuck in a house together. They can't go anywhere. They can't do anything. And then somehow the parents are all supposed to be forcing their kids to do school while at home, and they're not used to that either. And so, welcome to homeschooling. Although I can trust that you're probably doing it wrong. It's easier than it looks. And before I get into any more trouble, I'm just going to leave it there. But yeah, everyone needs to have something in which we do in order to blow off a little steam. When your gyms are closed, when your jiu-jitsu and karate, your martial arts clubs are closed, it can make things harder. Everyone needs something which is cathartic. This is one of the reasons for this show, actually, is because I find it cathartic. And if people are it's an opportunity for me to think through a bunch of issues. It's an opportunity for me to blow off some steam, to see what I see out there and then make commentary about it. I'm not saying I'm right, but it is helpful for me to think through some issues and to share them with others. And if that others is 5 people, then great. If not, whatever. Find something that helps you get through the day, that helps you through this very stressful time, and yeah, find that thing and do it. Take care of yourselves out there. We'll see you next week. If you have any comments, you know where to reach me on Twitter. I'm not even sure what it is. CC Michael 4 on Twitter, CC Michael on Facebook, CC Michael 3520 on email. I appreciate the input that I'm getting. I appreciate the conversations that we're having, and yeah, keep them coming. It's great. Thanks very much. Take care.